Preface to 6 lyrics from the Ruthenian of Taras Shevchenko, and the song of the merchant Kalashnikov from the Russian of Mikhail Lermontov, rendered into English verse with a biographical sketch by Voynich. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A dead voice called to me from a rotting grave in far Ruthenia, the voice of a long-dead slave in far Ruthenia, called to me bitterly, called me unceasingly, from far Ruthenia. C. A. Nicholson. Preface by E. L. Voynich. It is with some diffidence that these attempts at translation are offered to the public. No reader can feel more acutely than myself how far they lag behind the originals. Especially do I feel it with regard to the 6 lyrics from Shevchenko, the peasant poet of the Ukraina. To render adequately the haunting music of his Ruthenian tongue, one would need not merely the gift, but also the border speech of the unknown poets who gave us Helen of Kirkconnell and the wife of Usher's Well. I am so sensible of this that, had Shevchenko written in a language as accessible to most English readers as French or German, this volume would perhaps not have been published. But if a man leave immortal lyrics hidden away from Western Europe in a minor Slavonic idiom between Russian, Servian and Polish, it seems hard that he should go untranslated while waiting for the perfect rendering which may never come. Inadequate as are these few specimens, they show some dim shadow of the mind of a poet who has done for the Dnieper country what Burns did for Scotland. My reason for adding a biographical sketch is that his work, though easily comprehensible to his countrymen, would be difficult for English readers to understand without some knowledge of the circumstances in which it was written. As for Lermontov and his masterpiece, they are both too well known to need any help from me. I include this version of the famous Song of Kalashnikov because making it has given me so much pleasure that I hope others may find pleasure in reading it. E. L. Voynich, London, 1911. End of Preface by E. L. Voynich. Taras Shevchenko by E. L. Voynich. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Taras Shevchenko was born in 1814 near the Dnieper, in a rural district of that Ruthenian Ukraina, borderland, which its Russian rulers call Little Russia. His parents were agricultural serfs, the property of a half-Russianized, half-Polonized German named Engelhardt. He lost his mother very early and his father a few years later. After the kind elder sister had left home, the younger children remained as undesired encumbrances in their stepmother's overcrowded cabin. She had been a widow with a family when the father married her. Even had she meant kindly by the orphans, the food they ate would have been needed for her own half-starved children. Her feeling towards the obstinate and rebellious Taras seems to have been little short of hatred. Once, apparently, she and her men lodgers came near to killing him, in the process of extracting from him a confession of a petty theft, which not he, but her own son had committed. I saw hell, he tells us of his childhood. At an early age, he was sent as a pupil apprentice to a diachok, parish clerk and sexton, who kept a village school. Beyond the alphabet and a few prayers, the diachok's chief idea of education was to flog all the boys every Saturday. The apprentice did all the housework, and was also used as a substitute to gabble the burial service over the dead when the diachok was too drunk to get through it, and as a kind of smike in the school. As he grew older, the weekly execution was deputed to him. This enabled him to extort food and coppers from boys smaller than himself. He also learned to steal from the neighbours. After 2 years at the school, he found the Dyachok one day alone and helplessly drunk, and seized the opportunity to pay him back with a savage mauling, after which he thought it prudent to run away, taking with him a stolen and long-coveted treasure, an illustrated book. He now began to wander about the district, hiring himself out to do odd jobs, running away when too much beaten or starved, and always looking out for someone who could teach him to draw. The making of icons and rude pictures to sell at village fairs had long been a local industry, and Taras lived in the hope of becoming an icon painter. At a cost of much patience and many punishments, he amassed a small hoard of stolen pencils, sheets of paper, and pictures to copy. But he could not get anyone to teach him, and in time, sheer hunger drove him back to his own village, Kirillovka. Here he was set to mind sheep. His career as a shepherd soon ended abruptly, and to the usual accompaniment of thrashing. He had forgotten the existence of the sheep, and they had strayed. Short as it was, however, it had played an important part in his life. It had brought him his first friend. She was a little curly-headed girl named Oksana. She found him crying one day among the sheep, one of the poems tells us, and kissed him for sympathy. Then the sun came out and all the world was mine. He seems to have grown up with the notion of someday marrying her, and many years later, when a famous man came back to the district and sought for her, but Oksana had run off with the soldiers and gone to the bad, after the manner of curly-headed serf girls. At the age of 15, he succeeded in finding an icon painter, who, after seeing him draw, offered to teach him without charge, demanding only that he should produce a permit from his owner, as it was a penal offence to harbour a runaway serf. He therefore tramped back to Kirillovka to ask the intendant of the estate for a permit. The owner's son, a cavalry officer stationed in Poland, had asked the intendant to pick out the brightest boys on the estate, break them into domestic service, and forward them to him. The intendant therefore put Taras into the kitchen of the manor house to be trained for a cook. He proved no better as a scullion than as a shepherd. At every opportunity he left the saucepans unscoured and slipped out of doors to draw. At last it occurred to the intendant that as no amount of beating seemed to have any effect, it might be as well to turn the drawing to account. Taras was accordingly sent to Poland with a report that he had been tried in the kitchen and found useless, but that he had a turn for drawing, and might, if trained, be set to decorate the house. Many wealthy landowners possessed serfs who had a turn for something or other, and found them quite useful. Captain Engelhardt, however, did not want a decorator, so Taras was provided with a suit of clothes and installed as a page. His work was to sit in the passage outside his master's door, and come in when called to fill a pipe, find a pocket handkerchief, or fetch slippers. In order that nothing might distract his attention, he was forbidden to read, sing, or talk while on duty, and especially to draw at any time. Drawing was the unpardonable offence. So, from time to time there were punishments for stealing candle ends and drawing secretly by night. On one occasion, the master, returning late from a ball, was kept waiting at the street door till someone got up to admit him. Coming in, he found the page who had been told to sit up for him too much absorbed in drawing to see or hear. That time, Captain Engelhardt was very angry, and the consequences will not bear detailed description. But they failed to cure Taras of drawing. By the time he was 18, it was his master, not he, who had yielded. In Warsaw he was given a few drawing lessons. Then, when the Polish insurrection broke out, Captain Engelhardt retired from the service out of its way and settled in St. Petersburg, and there he apprenticed the boy to a painter and decorator named Shiryayev. The apprentice was to receive board, lodging, and tuition, But the last item was a fiction. He was taught not decorative painting, but house painting, and was then hired out for Shiryaev's benefit, as was the case with the 3 other apprentices, also serfs, whose sleeping garret he shared. A few years later, one of the students of the St. Petersburg Academy of Arts, a Ruthenian named Shevchenko, walking in the summer garden on a fine night, saw a young peasant in a house painter's dirty blouse, sitting with a piece of paper on his knee and trying to draw one of the statues. Noticing the lad's Ruthenian type, he spoke to him in his own language. Shevchenko acknowledged after some pressing that he was in the habit of coming to the park to draw, but only on clear nights or before sunrise, as he was at work by day and was also afraid to come when people were about. Shevchenko looked at the drawing and invited him to call at his studio on the next holiday. As much patient coaxing was needed to tame Shevchenko as if he had been some timid wild animal. On his first arrival at the studio, he began by trying to kiss the hand held out to him, that being the proper way to approach gentlefolk. When it was pulled away, he turned and fled, convinced that he had somehow made the gentleman angry. Shevchenko searched for some days before finding him again, and had much difficulty in persuading him to come back. Bribes of books, pencils, and especially candles by which to read or draw in the garret at night, when the others were asleep, proved more efficacious than any assurances of goodwill. In time he was won over to spend all his spare moments at the studio, and even left off running away in a panic whenever a visitor came. On holidays he now sat at table with artists and men of letters, read the books they lent him, learned drawing, looked at pictures, and listened to theoretical discussions. At other times he was Engelhardt's serf, and Shiryaev's bond labourer, sharing a dirty garret with other serfs and liable to a serf's punishments if he failed to give satisfaction. The effect on his mind of this double existence was such that his friends began to fear he would end it by suicide unless something could be done. Professor Brylov, the director of the Academy of Arts, had taken an interest in him for some time, at first because he had not got a serf's face, and later because of the drawings. He promised that an academy's scholarship should be granted if Engelhardt could be induced to waive his right of ownership. The average price of a young male serf was not formidably high, but Engelhardt had already realized the usefulness of a turn for drawing, having more than once had portraits of his mistresses painted by Shevchenko, whom he had tipped at the rate of ₹1 for each portrait. Moreover, Professor Brylov, who first approached Engelhardt, made the initial mistake of appealing to this middle-aged man about town on grounds of humanity to take his own view of the case. When he had returned home, raging against the amphibious beast in slippers, who had merely laughed at him, the friend who succeeded him, asking, "How much will you take?" was given to understand that people seemed to think this young man a genius, and if you want geniuses, you have to pay for them. "It's not a question of philanthropy," Engelhardt is reported as saying. "It's a question of money. My price is 2,500 rubles. From Shevchenko's point of view, it might as well have been 2.5 millions. But his friends were less easily discouraged. The money was finally raised by means of a raffle for a picture which Brylov had painted for the purpose, and paid to Engelhardt on the 22nd of April 1838. We are told that it was found useless to explain any details to Shevchenko. He would do nothing but kiss the paper and sob. During the first few months of his life as an art student, he seems to have had his head a little turned by the curiosity which his story aroused in St. Petersburg. Fashionable ladies wanted to see the interesting savage who, for a short time, took to going out in the evening, neglected his work, and even quarrelled with Shevchenko, the person to whom he owed most, over some silly and apparently rather discreditable love affair. He soon recovered his senses, but the drawing now took a second place. As Shevchenko expressed it, he had begun to waste his time on scribbling verses. So far as is known, the tendency to scribble never woke in him till after he had seen Engelhart's signature to the emancipation paper. Whether his friend's disappointment with his academy work had any justification or not, the work was good enough to win several prizes and enable him to earn a modest living by drawing for commissions during the greater part of his student's life. The first little volume of poems appeared in 1840, the second in 1842. They were received with passionate enthusiasm in Kiev and the whole Ukraine, but with chilling contempt in St. Petersburg. Russian critics had not yet discovered that Ruthenian is an independent and singularly beautiful language, possessing a glorious folk literature. It was a jargon spoken by common peasants, and to write verse in it was absurd. Shevchenko took their censure bitterly to heart, and, with characteristic deference to the commands of gentlefolk, tried his hand at writing in Russian, naturally without success. In 1843, he went back to the Ukraine for a holiday. This time it was not patronage, but a lionizing which for a moment threatened his stability. Dragged from one country house to another, and surrounded by celebrity hunters, many of whom were idle and drunken, he too began to drink. Luckily for him, one of the great ladies of the country, Princess Varvara Repnina, was a sensible woman who soon gained much influence over him. She mothered him affectionately, and seems to have quickly made him ashamed of the set and habits into which he was falling. He pulled up and went back to work. More verses followed, and in 1845 he received his diploma, left the academy, and set up as a portrait painter. In the same year, he was appointed art expert to the Kiev Archaeological Commission. He now began to think of settling in Kiev, where he was idolized by the university students. Meanwhile, on a holiday visit to his native district, he fell in love with the daughter of an old priest, whose servant he had once been when a child. The parents refused to give her to a common serf boy. It was useless to explain to them that his social status had altered. His fame, his comfortable income, his aristocratic friends were all unavailing. He might be a celebrity in Kiev and St. Petersburg. At Kirillovka he was just Taras. Their veto was immovable, and the engagement was broken off, apparently against the girl's wish, for she refused all other offers and died unmarried. At the beginning of 1847, he was appointed arts lecturer to Kiev University. Immediately afterwards, he, his friend the historian Kostomarov, and many other persons were arrested on a charge of belonging to a seditious body called the Brotherhood of Saints Cyril and Methodius. Shevchenko denied membership, and the police, on investigation, withdrew the charge. As for the society, which Kostomarov had started among the university students, it was seditious to the extent of advocating religious liberty, popular education, the abolition of serfdom, of corporal punishment and of the death penalty, and the ultimate federation of all Slavonic peoples. But the official police report acquits it of any more revolutionary aims than to found schools and to publish books for the poor. Shevchenko, the report continues, though not a member of the society, was actuated by his own vicious tendencies. He had composed in the Little Russian tongue verses of a most abominable character, which might set people dreaming, and had shown boundless impudence. The extraordinary respect felt by all Ukrainian Slavists, both for Shevchenko personally and for his poems, and his reputation as a famous Little Russian writer, might make his verses doubly harmful and dangerous. So he must be regarded as one of the more important offenders. The other prisoners were sentenced to detention in fortresses for various terms. Shevchenko, in consideration of his robust constitution, to military service in the Orenburg. Special Disciplinary Brigade. His poems to be withdrawn from circulation, and measures to be taken to ensure his having no further opportunity to draw, paint, or compose any more abominable and scurrilous verses. His unpublished poems, left in the charge of a friend, were placed by her in a box and buried in the earth to save them from the police. Some years later, the box was dug up and the manuscripts were lost or destroyed. All that is known of them is that they belong to his finest period. During his first 3 years of military penal servitude, one at Orsk where he was attacked by scurvy, one in a fortress near the Aral Lake, and one at Orenburg, he was placed under commanders who showed him as much kindness as their orders permitted, and allowed him to correspond with his friends. They reported his conduct as in every way satisfactory, and suggested promotion. For some time, they not only winked at his possessing drawing materials, but even made the preparation of drawings for an official publication of the War Ministry a part of his work, and associated with him in the task a Polish political prisoner, Bronislaw Zaleski. Being provided with a little money, he succeeded in protecting himself from physical violence, though not from threats of it, by bribing with drink and delicacies the drill sergeants and some of the officers. One of the latter, having borrowed 68 rubles, threatened him with punishment when he asked for the return of the loan. Other officers treated him as an equal, and let him take refuge in their quarters from the noise, vermin, and conversation of the barracks. "Imagine," he writes to Princess Varvara after an evening spent in an officer's rooms, "it was worse than the barracks, and these people, God have mercy on them, have pretensions to education and decent manners. God, am I going to grow like them?" His petitions and that of Princess Varvara to the authorities at St. Petersburg that he might be allowed to paint landscape or portraits remained fruitless. "I call Almighty God to witness," one petition runs, "that I have never made a seditious drawing in my life." Nevertheless, he did draw. At Orenburg, the commander, Obruchev, allowed him to sleep out of barracks, and a Polish resident in the town, though personally a stranger to him, made him welcome in his house, and kept not only painting materials, but civilian dress at his disposal. In 1850, an officer sent in a report that Private Shevchenko was writing verses, painting portraits, and wearing civilian dress. A search was made, and he was found in the possession of Private's letters, a Bible, Shakespeare, The Imitation of Christ, Lermontov, Pushkin, and other Russian classics, a box of paints, portfolios for drawings, and civilian clothing. A report was sent to the Emperor Nicholas, by whose personal wish the writing and drawing had been forbidden. He replied, commanding that the offender should be kept under strict arrest while his immediate superiors answered before the law for their slackness in permitting him to draw. The investigation was conducted by the St. Petersburg 3rd Section and Chief of Gendarmerie, who found that Private Shevchenko was guilty of disobeying the imperial prohibition to write and draw, but that there was no offence in the character of the verses and drawings seized. He was therefore only transferred to the fortress of Novopetrovsk in the Caspian Salt Desert, special instructions being forwarded with him that he was on no account to be allowed paper, pencils, pens, or ink. During the 7 years of his life there, he produced, so far as is known, no verses. Shortly after his arrival, he wrote to Princess Varvara, "My superiors are indulgent, my health is good." She did not answer. Letters from her had been found at the search, and she had received from a high official the following intimation: "Your correspondence with Shevchenko and the fact that you formally wrote to me pleading for alleviations of the lot of the said private prove you to have taken in him an interest of a vicious, disgraceful, and unseemly nature. Your Excellency will do well in future to occupy yourself less with the affairs of Little Russia, otherwise." Receiving no more letters, either from her or from another friend who had also been threatened with consequences, Shevchenko came in time to the conclusion that they had forgotten him. For 18 months, none of his friends had any news of him. Then occasional letters reached them. In 1852 he writes, "Sand and stones, if there were any grass or a tree. I was born a slave, and it seems I shall die a private. I wish it would end somehow, anyhow. I am getting tired of it." In 1853, "I am a beggar in the true sense, not only in material things. My heart is beggared. If you could see the people that surround me, they crush me, crush me. I must bow and scrape, or they may squash me altogether like a louse between their fingernails." One of the officers in the fortress mentioned afterwards the special zest with which the drunken Captain Potapov, under whose immediate command Shevchenko was placed for some time, would set on the non-commissioned officers to chivvy him and search him for pencils, and at drill would hold him up to public ridicule for clumsiness, for keeping his eyes down, for answering in a low voice, for looking unhappy. It is true that in the Russian army this last constitutes a breach of discipline, since "look cheerful" is an official word of command. The first manifesto of Alexander II was accompanied by an amnesty, but Shevchenko was not included in it, and was told so a year later. Meanwhile, Countess Tolstaya had begun to agitate on his behalf. She had never met him, but had read his poems. He wrote to her in 1856, "One more year and I am lost." Another letter to a friend, 1856, says, "When I was transferred, I picked up on the road a willow twig, brought it here and stuck it into the earth in the garrison kitchen garden. I watered it, and now it is tall and thick. I'm going to draw it, of course secretly. It reminds me of the legend of the repentant brigand. He came with his iron-bound club and asked to be shriven, but his sins were great and dreadful. The hermit took him up onto a hill, stuck the club into the ground and told him to carry up water in his mouth. Then shall thy sins be forgiven, when from this instrument of death shall grow a tree and shall bear fruit." Years passed. One day the hermit in meditation wandered up the hill. On the top was a magnificent pear tree covered with ripe fruit, and under the tree sat an old man with a beard down to his feet. "My willow has grown, and still my sins are not forgiven. But he was only a brigand, and I, alas, was a poet. Just as 10 years ago," he writes of the arrival of a certain major to inspect the garrison, "he examined us, word for word the same. 'What are you here for?' 'For stealing government money, your honour. I hope, in future.' 'And you?' 'For composing abominable verses, your honour. I hope, in future.' Just as 10 years ago." Countess Tolstaya met with one rebuff after another, and the coronation amnesty also was issued without Shevchenko's name. After that, he took to drinking. In 1857, the Emperor consented to his release, and in the summer he started for St. Petersburg at the invitation of the Tolstoy family. On the way he was rearrested at Nizhny Novgorod. It turned out to be only a question of a dispute between officials about the permit papers, but he was kept waiting some months for them at Nizhny Novgorod. While there, he made a formal proposal to the parents of a young actress whom he had met for her hand in marriage, but the girl ran out of the house, thinking him mad, and the parents shut their doors in his face. The result was another drinking bout. In the spring of 1858 he was allowed to go to the Tolstoys at St. Petersburg. They found him both mentally and physically wrecked. Drink had taken possession of him, scurvy had devoured his body, and his mind revolved dully round certain fixed points. He still wished to write, but, though he succeeded in re-editing some of his old work, the new attempts were mostly poor stuff, and often either in Russian or in some unknown bastard jargon between Russian and Ruthenian. Turgenev, who met him at the Academy of Arts and tried to make friends with him, says, We literary men received him with friendly sympathy, but he was cautious and would scarcely ever open out to anyone. He had a trick of slipping past sideways. One seldom saw anything poetical in him. He seemed rough and hardened. Again, there were traces of the private about him. The expression of his eyes was mostly sullen and suspicious, but once in a way there was a delightful smile. He made an attempt to settle in the Ukraina, but was rearrested, and though released at once, is said to have received an official hint that he had better keep out of the country. The short remainder of his life was spent in St. Petersburg. Having lost from long disuse the power of painting, he worked for a living as an engraver, and filled part of his spare time by writing elementary school books for Ruthenian peasant children. One, an alphabet, was published. The history, geography, and arithmetic primers were still unfinished at his death. The rest of his time was divided between efforts to obtain the liberation of his brothers and sister, who were still serfs, bouts of drinking, a certain amount of social life, and a series of unsuccessful attempts to get married. He does not seem to have felt any very particular interest in one girl rather than in another, but he was haunted by the terror of dying alone, and passionately begged his friends to find him a wife. She must be a Ruthenian, a peasant who would not despise him. What would a lady do in my little place? And by preference, she should be an orphan and friendless. Apparently, he had a dim notion of making some poor girl happy in return for protection against the ever-present nightmare of a solitary death. One such girl refused with horror, "But he's so old and bald and grey." Another, a St. Petersburg maidservant, accepted him, apparently for the sake of the presents he brought her, but openly laughed at him behind his back. To the relief of his friends, the marriage was broken off at the last moment. "What am I to do with myself?" he says in a letter to a friend. "I shall go mad here, alone in a foreign land." By the end of 1860, it was clear that he was dying. He held on to life in the hope of seeing the emancipation of the serfs, which had already been promised. The edict was to have been issued on the 19th of February 1861, but when the day came, there was no edict, and on the 26th he died. On the 5th of March, the emancipation was proclaimed, and a few weeks later his friends received permission to take his body to the Ukraina and bury it beside the Dnieper. The lost gift had come back towards the end. Winter, one of his finest poems, was written a month before his death. How far the limitations of Shevchenko's mind were the result of his circumstances, and how far inherent, it would be difficult to say. Certain fixed prejudices of his race and class might perhaps have disappeared in a wider life. In the barracks they grew more rigid with years. He seems to have recognized only two kinds of person in the world: God's people, who do all the hard work and sing all the lovely songs, and the wicked privileged classes who prey upon and maltreat them. The Poles, whom a Ruthenian peasant meets, are chiefly of the provincial landowning class, and often selfish and reactionary. Therefore, all Poles are hard landlords and oppressors of the poor, and their language is gentlefolk's talk. Jewish moneylenders and drink shop keepers have caused untold misery in Ruthenian villages. Therefore, all Jews are bloodsuckers. Russian rule he had seen and felt. Therefore, all Russians are monsters. Individuals who had shown him personal kindness or affection were surprising exceptions, and even them he could never quite trust. His convictions are as immovable as those of a 17th century Anabaptist. As for his unrealized personal ambitions, he has given us a list of them. "I asked such little things of God," one of the lyrics says. "A hut by the Dnieper, where he could live with my poor girl, Oksana, and sing folk songs in the evening after the day's work. A bit of land to cultivate, a patch of garden ground, 2 poplar trees of his own, and to die by the Dnieper, and to be buried on such a tiny little hill. End of Taras Shevchenko by E.L. Voynich. Six lyrics from the Ruthenian of Taras Shevchenko, translated by E.L. Voynich. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 1. Written shortly before his arrest. From day to day, from night to night, my summer passes. Autumn creeps nearer. Before mine eyes the light fades out. My soul is blind and sleeps. Everything sleeps, and I ponder. Do I yet live, or do I wander? A dead thing through my term of years, as void of laughter as of tears. Come to me, my fate, where art thou? Oh, I have no fate. God, if thou dost scorn to love me, grant me but thy hate. Only let my heart not wither slowly, day by day, useless as a fallen tree trunk, rotting by the way. Let me live, and live in spirit, loving all mankind. Or, if not, then let my curses strike the sunlight blind. Wretched is the fettered captive, dying, and a slave. But more wretched he that living sleeps as in a grave, till he falls asleep for ever, leaving not a sign that there faded into darkness something once divine. Come to me, my fate, where art thou? Oh, I have no fate. God, if thou dost scorn to love me, grant me but thy hate. 2. Written the first year in the disciplinary brigade. Only friend, clear evening twilight, come and talk to me. Cross the hills to share my prison very secretly. Tell me how the sun in splendour sets behind the hill, how the Dnieper lasses carry pitchers down to fill, how the broad-leaved sycamore flings his branches wide, how the willow kneels to pray by the riverside, how her green boughs kiss the water, trailing half asleep, and unchristened ghosts of babies swing from them and weep, how lost souls at lonely crossroads cower wild and dumb, when the owl shrieks from the alder of the wrath to come, how the magic flowers open at the moonbeam's touch. But of men, what would you tell me, me who know so much, far too much, and you know nothing? Why, you understand nothing of what men are doing now in my dear land. But I know, and I will tell you without end. When you speak with God tomorrow, look, you tell him, friend. 3. The Reaper, written in the disciplinary brigade, first or second year. Through the fields the reaper goes, piling sheaves on sheaves in rows. Hills, not sheaves are these. Where he passes, howls the earth, howl the echoing seas. All the night the reaper reaps, never stays his hand nor sleeps, reaping endlessly, whets his blade and passes on. Hush, and let him be. Hush, he cares not how men writhe, with naked hands against the scythe. Wouldst thou hide in field or town? Where thou art, there he will come, he will reap thee down. Serf and landlord, great and small, friendless wandering singer, all shall swell the sheaves that grow to mountains, even the Tsar shall go. And me too the scythe shall find, cowering alone behind bars of iron, swift and blind. Strike and pass, and leave me, stark and forgotten in the dark. 4. written in the disciplinary brigade, 1st or 2nd year. Dig my grave and raise my barrow by the Dnieper side, in Ukraina, my own land, a fair land and wide. I will lie and watch the cornfields, listen through the years to the river voices roaring, roaring in my ears. When I hear the call of the racing flood, loud with hated blood, I will leave them all, fields and hills, and force my way right up to the throne, where God sits alone, clasp his feet, and pray. But till that day, what is God to me? Bury me, be done with me, rise and break your chain, water your new liberty, with blood for rain. Then, in the mighty family of all men that are free, maybe, sometimes, very softly, you will speak of me. 5. So far as is known, the last thing written in the disciplinary brigade, 3rd year. There are no verses and few letters for the next 7 years. I care not. Shall I see my dear own land before I die, or no? Nor who forgets me, buried here in desert wastes of alien snow, though all forget me, better so. A slave from my first bitter years, most surely I shall die a slave, ungraced of any kinsman's tears, and carry with me to my grave everything, and leave no trace, no little mark to keep my place in the dear lost Ukraina, which is not ours, though our land, and none shall ever understand. No father to his son shall say, kneel down and fold your hands and pray. He died for our Ukraina. I care no longer if the child shall pray for me or pass me by. One only thing I cannot bear, to know my land that was beguiled into a death trap with a lie, trampled and ruined and defiled. Ah, but I care, dear God, I care. 6. Winter. Written in exile in Russia, about a month before his death. Thy youth is over. Time has brought winter upon thee. Hope is grown chill as the north wind. Thou art old. Sit thou in thy dark house alone. With no man converse shalt thou hold. With no man shalt take counsel. Naught art thou, naught be thy desire. Sit still alone by thy dead fire, till hope shall mock thee, fool, again, blinding thine eyes with frosty gleams, vexing thy soul with dreams like snowflakes in the empty plain. Sitst thou alone, alone and dumb. Cry not for spring, it will not come. It will not enter at thy door, nor make thy garden green once more, nor cheer with hope thy withered age, nor loose thy spirit from her cage. Sit still, thy life is spent. Naught art thou, be with naught content. End of 6 lyrics by Taras Shevchenko, translated by E.L. Voynich. The Song of the Merchant Kalashnikov, from the Russian of Mikhail Lermontov, translated by E.L. Voynich. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Song of the Tsar Ivan Vasilievich, of the young Oprichniki and of the bold merchant Kalashnikov. Now all hail to thee, Tsar Ivan Vasilievich. Of thee and of thine have we made our song. Of the young Oprichnik thou dearly lovest, of the merchants the bold Kalashnikov. We fashioned it after the ancient way, we sang it in tune to the dulcimer's sound, we chanted it loudly that all men might hear, and the Orthodox folk took delight in our song. The Boyarin, Matvey Romodanovsky, brought to us foaming mead in a goblet, and his young Boyarinya, fair of countenance, offered to us on a platter of silver a new towel with silken broideries. 3 days and 3 nights have they feasted us, and hearkened, and are not weary of hearing. 1. Oh, is it the bright sun that shineth in heaven, and are they the clouds that draw light from his face? Nay, here sitteth at meat the golden-crowned, the terrible Tsar Ivan Vasilievich. Together behind him the cupbearers stand, before his face the boyare and princes, and around him all the oprichniki. So feasteth the Tsar, to the glory of God, to his own exceeding comfort and joy. Then, smiling, the Tsar gave command to his servants that they fill to the brim his golden cup with the sweet red wine from over the sea, and bear it round to all the oprichniki. And they drank and rejoiced and praised the Tsar. But one alone of all the oprichniki, a bold fighter and dreadful in battle, never wetted his beard in the golden cup. On the earth his gloomy eyes were fixed, and his head sank down on his mighty chest, and the thought in his heart was a bitter thought. Then the Tsar drew his black brows together in wrath, and he turned his gaze upon the oprichnik. So looketh the hawk from heaven's blue height on the tender wings of the turtle dove. Yet the warrior lifted not his eyes. Then the Tsar struck his staff upon the ground, that its point of iron was driven down full 3 inches deep through the oaken floor. Yet the warrior started not, nor moved. Then thus spake the Tsar, a terrible word, and the young man roused him out of his dream. Thou, our faithful servant, Kiribievich, dost thou hide in thy soul an evil intent? Dost thou envy thy master his glory? Or say, is our service so heavy a burden? All the star-folk are glad when the moon appeareth, that the pathways of heaven are bright to their feet. But if any star hideth her face in a cloud, she falleth headlong from heaven to earth. Ill beseemeth it thee, Kiribievich, thus to carp and to frown at the joy of thy lord. Thou that was born of the race of Skuratov, thou that was bred in the house of Malyuta. Then answereth thus Kiribievich, bowing lowly before the terrible Tsar. O master and lord, Ivan Vasilievich, be not angered against thine unworthy slave, for sweet wine shall not quench a burning heart, nor yet may it lull black sorrow to sleep. But if thou be wroth, is thy will not as fate? Nay, strike off my head if it please thee so. It weighs on my shoulders, broad though they be, and gladly in truth will I lay it down. Then said unto him Ivan Vasilievich, O young gallant, what cause to lament thee hast thou? I doubt me thy gold-broidered mantle is worn, or the moth has devoured thy sable furs, or thy purse is empty, thy money all spent. Hast thou found a fault in thy keen sword-edge? Is thy horse ill-shod? Has he fallen lame? Or hast thou been thrown? Hast thou suffered defeat in the boxing match from a merchant's son? Then answereth thus Kiribievich, shaking his head with the curling locks. Not yet hath been born the man that shall throw me, whether merchant he be, or of noble house. Merrily goeth my horse in his pride, shineth as glass the keen edge of my sword, and on holidays, thanks to thy graciousness, I can deck me as gay as another. When I ride through the town on my prancing horse, by the Moscow river where all may see, with my silken girdle about me tied, and my cap of samite set atilt, bordered with sable black and rare. At the wooden gates of the houses stand all the young maidens and wedded wives, look and wonder and whisper together. One alone never looketh nor turneth her head, but hideth her face in her silken veil. Though thou seek throughout our mother, holy Russia, another one shalt thou not find so fair. Moveth stately as a gliding swan, gazeth sweetly as a brooding dove, speaketh, 'tis as sings the nightingale. Brightly burns the red upon her cheeks, like unto the dawn in God's clear heaven. And the sunny tresses, golden gleaming, meetly bound with many-coloured ribbons, waving, twining, float across her shoulders, curl and kiss upon her bosom white. For her birth, she cometh of a merchant's household, and her name is Alyona Dmitrievna. My heart is dust when I see her face. All the might goeth out from my strong sword arm, and my eyes are dimmed as with the shadows of even. Right sorrowful am I, most orthodox Tsar, and alone, alone in the world so wide. I am weary of swift-footed horses, I am weary of silk and of samite, and I care not at all for treasure of gold. With whom shall I share my wealth? Before whom shall I show my horsemanship, and to whom shall I boast of my brave attire? Let me go to the desert Volga lands, to the open waste where the Cossacks dwell. There death shall bring peace to my restless heart, even death at the point of an infidel's lance, and the cruel Tartars shall share together my keen-edged sword, and my faithful steed, and his trappings of rare Circassian work. The ravens shall drink the tears from mine eyes, and my bones shall bleach in the autumn rains. Without mass or dirge, mine unhappy dust shall be scattered abroad to the winds of heaven. Then answered, laughing, Ivan Vasilievich, Nay, rather than this, my faithful servant, will I seek for a means that shall ease thy grief. Now, take thou therefore my jacinth ring, and take thou this collar of orient pearls. To the prudent matchmaker bow thee low, and send these gifts of precious worth to thy fair Alyona Dmitrievna. If she favour thy suit, call the wedding feast, and if not, then console thee as best thou mayst. Now, all hail to thee, Tsar Ivan Vasilievich. But thy wily slave hath deceived thee, hath not told thee truth and verity. Thou knowest not that this woman so fair is a married wife in wedlock bound to a merchant, in God's most holy church, by the sacred law of Christian men. Hey, merry minstrels, sing, but tune each sounding string. Hey, merry minstrels, drink, let the foaming goblets clink. Do all honour to the virtuous boyarin, and his young boyarinya, fair of countenance. 2. In the busy bazaar the young merchant sitteth, the bold gallant Stepan Paramonovitch, called by the name of Kalashnikov. All around him he spreadeth his silken wares. With fair speech he enticeth the strangers to enter, telling with care the gold and silver coins. But an evil day is this day to him. All the rich boyare pass his booth and turn not, enter not to chaffer and to buy. Now in the holy churches the bells have rung for vespers. Red the misty sunset burns above the Kremlin. Clouds rush out, and swift across the heavens flee before the anger of the shouting storm wind. Empty and deserted is the wide bazaar. Now Stepan Paramonovitch closeth up the oaken door, and maketh it fast with a lock of cunning workmanship. And hard by the door with an iron chain he bindeth the watchdog faithful and grim. Then sadly and soberly goeth he home to his fair young wife by the riverside. Now cometh he into his lofty house, and amazement seetheth Stepan Paramonovitch. His young wife standeth not in the doorway to greet him. On the oaken table no cloth is spread, and the lamp by the holy shrine burns dim. Then he calls aloud to the old serving-woman. How now, what is this, Yeremyevna? Now tell me, whither is gone so late in the night, Alyona Dmitrovna, and what of my little children dear? Without doubt they have gambled and played their fill, and weary have laid them early to sleep. O master mine, Stepan Paramonovitch, I will tell unto thee a marvellous thing. To the vespers went Alyona Dmitrovna. Now the priest with his young bride hath passed by the door. Bright shineth the lamp where they sit at meat, and yet all this while my mistress, thy wife, returneth not home from the parish church, and the little children thou lovest well have not gambled nor played, nor in sleep are laid, but weep, and will not be comforted. Now a bitter thought taketh hold on the heart of the brave young merchant Kalashnikov. Now standeth he gazing out on the street, and a black night looketh in at the window, and the white snow falling filleth the way, hiding the tracks of the feet of men. Now he heareth the sound of a closing door, and the footsteps of one that is sore in haste. Now he turneth him round. By the holy rood, in the doorway standeth his fair young wife, white as a spectre, with head uncovered, loose on her shoulders the flaxen tresses, all tangled and scattered with melting snowflakes. Wide her eyes that stare, bereft of understanding, open mouth that whispereth of things unknown. My wife, where hast thou been wandering? In what house, in what shameful place of the streets, that thy locks are uncovered to all men's eyes, that thus thy garments are soiled and torn? As a harlot thou comest from feasting, I trow, with the lewd young sons of the proud boyare. Not for this, my wife, in God's holy church did we kneel for the solemn marriage blessing. Not for this wert thou wed with my golden ring. I will shut thee away behind bars and bolts, behind iron gratings and oaken doors. Thou shalt see no more the sweet light of day, lest thou bring disgrace on mine honest name. And hearing these words, Alyona Dmitrovna fell to trembling and shaking. My golden dove quivered as quiver the leaves of the aspen. Bitterly, bitterly weeping, she cast her prone on the floor, and lay at his feet. Bright son of my life, thou my master and lord, either slay me this night, or hearken to me. Keen are thy words as a two-edged knife, that cutteth the core of my heart in twain. Little fear have I of the torments of death, neither fear I the cruel tongues of men, but I fear thine anger, my lord. Even now I came from the vespers home in the twilight alone, in the lonely streets, and methought that I heard the snow rustle behind. I looked back. 'Twas a man running swift as the wind. Then I felt my legs beneath me fail, and I covered my face with my silken veil. Now he caught my hands with a grasp of might, and softly he whispered thus in mine ear, Fair woman, why tremblest thou? What shouldst thou fear? No brigand am I, no thief of the night. Nay, I serve the terrible Tsar himself. For my name it is Kiryeyevich, and I come from the glorious house of Malyuta. Oh, then did I count me for lost indeed, and mine ears were filled as with roaring of waters. And then began he to kiss and embrace me, and, kissing, murmured and murmured again, Answer me, tell me what thing thou desirest, my beloved, my sweetest, my fairest one. Wouldst thou gold or pearls from the orient seas? Wouldst thou flashing jewels or silver brocade? As a princess, so will I trick thee out, that all thy neighbours shall envy thee. Only let me not perish of bitter despite. Ah, have pity and love me, embrace me but once, nay, only this once, ere I leave thee. And he crushed me against him and kissed me again. Even now I can feel them scorching my cheek, burning as burneth the fire of hell, the accursed kisses he planted there. And the cruel neighbours looked out at their gateways, laughing and pointing at us with their fingers. When I tore me out of his grip at last, and ran headlong home to escape from him, in my flight I left in the brigand's hands my broidered kerchief, thy gift to me, and my silken veil of Bokhara work. He hath shamed me, he hath dishonoured me, a pure woman, undefiled. And what will the cruel neighbours say, and before whose eyes dare I show me now? Give me not up, thy true and faithful wife, to evil doers for a mockery. In whom but in thee can I put my trust? Unto whom but thee shall I turn for help? In all the wide world an orphan am I. My father lies under the churchyard mould, and beside him sleepeth my mother dear. And mine elder brother, thou knowest well, is long lost to our sight in far-off lands. And my younger brother is but a child, but a little child, understanding naught. Thus pleaded with him Alyona Dmitrovna, weeping and wailing, lamenting bitterly. Now Stepan Paramonovitch sendeth word that his 2 younger brothers should come in haste. Then came the 2 brothers, and bowed them low, and these be the words that they spake unto him. Our eldest brother, now tell us, we pray, what thing may it be that hath chanced to thee, that thou sendest for us in the night so dark, in the frost and snow? I will tell you true, O my brothers dear, that an evil thing hath chanced to me, that the Tsar's Oprichnik, the false Kiribyeyevich, hath defiled our honourable house, and a wrong such as this shall the heart not bear, nor the soul of a brave man suffer and live. Now tomorrow shall be the great boxing match by the riverside, in the Tsar's own sight. Then will I go out against the Oprichnik. I will fight to the death, to the uttermost. Should it chance that he slay me, do you come forth to defend our holy mother the right. Have no fear, O beloved brothers mine. You are younger than I, you are strong in your youth. Fewer sins can have spotted your souls as yet. So it may be that God shall have mercy on you. Then answered the brothers and spake unto him, Where the wind blows under the heaven's vault, there the clouds in obedience fulfil his commands. When the great eagle calls with a mighty voice to the banquet of death, to the feast of blood, to devour the slain on the battle plain, the young eaglets come flocking in answer. Our eldest art thou, in our father's place. Do thou as thou wilt, as it seemeth thee good, and we will not forsake thee, our flesh and our blood. Hey, merry minstrels, sing, but tune each sounding string. Hey, merry minstrels, drink, let the foaming goblets clink. Do all honour to the virtuous Boyarin, and his young Boyarinya, fair of countenance. 3. Over great Moscow, golden domed and mighty, over the marble Kremlin wall, from beyond the far forests, beyond the blue hills, along the raftered house roofs glimmering, chasing the pale clouds greyly shimmering, behold, ariseth now the fiery dawn, her yellow locks are flung across the heavens. She bathes in scattered snowflakes glittering, even as a maiden gazing on her mirror, she looketh laughing into God's clear sky. Thou scarlet sunrise, why hast thou awakened? For what delight art thou become so fair? Now are they gathered together all the young gallants of Moscow town, by the riverside to the boxing match, proud and glad for the holiday. and the Tsar himself is come hither in state. With boyare he comes, with oprichniki, and before him stretcheth the silver chain, and its links are clamped with the good red gold. For 50 paces the ring is staked, for the single combat, the boxing match. And now the Tsar Ivan Vasilievich commandeth to shout with a mighty voice, "Oh, where are you all, brave lads and true? Come show your strength to our father the Tsar. Come out to the ring so wide. The Tsar to the conqueror gifts shall give, and him that is conquered shall God forgive." Now first cometh forward the bold Kiribievich. Silent he bows him before the Tsar, flings from his shoulders the mantle of samite, stands with his right arm proudly akimbo, while his left hand toys with his scarlet cap. Thus he awaiteth an adversary. 3 times have the heralds shouted aloud, yet never a gallant comes out to the combat. They stand and whisper and nudge one another. To and fro in the ring the oprichnik strideth, mocking and flouting the craven boxers. Aha! They are silent, grown tame on a sudden. Nay, gallants, take heart. For the holiday's sake, I swear I will leave you your lives to repent in. I will but make sport for our father the Tsar. And behold, the crowd parteth to left and to right, and Stepan Paramonovitch cometh to meet him. The young merchant, the fighter, the undismayed, called by the name of Kalashnikov. First, he bows him low to the terrible Tsar, to the holy churches, the Kremlin white, and then unto all the people of Russia. Keen are his eyes as the eyes of a falcon, burning they gaze upon the oprichnik. Over against him he takes up his station, draws on the gloves, the stark harness of battle. Slowly he lifts him and straightens his shoulders, smoothing and stroking his curling beard. Then said unto him Kiribievich, Now tell me, I pray thee, good youth, of what race comest thou, of what family, by what name art thou called among men? I would learn, for whose souls shall the death mass be chanted? I would learn, of whom shall I boast me? Thus answered Stepan Paramonovitch, My name is Stepan Kalashnikov, and begotten was I of an honest man, and have lived all my days by God's holy law. I have not shamed another's wife, nor lain in wait like a thief in the dark, nor hid me away from heaven's light. And verily, verily, sooth hast thou spoken, for one of us two shall the death mass be chanted, and that ere tomorrow's sun be high. And one of us two shall boast him indeed, feasting in triumph among his friends. Not for a jest, to make sport for the people, come I hither this day, thou child of damnation. I come for the death fight, the terrible fight. And hearing these words, Kiribievich whitened in face like to autumn snow. Shadows of doom flitted over his eyes. Between the strong shoulders the frost went by, and speech lay dead in his open mouth. Silently, therefore, they drew them apart, and in silence the battle of heroes began. Then first lifted his arm Kiribievich, and he struck the merchant Kalashnikov full on the breast with a crashing blow. Such a blow that the breast gave back the sound, and Stepan Paramonovitch staggered and reeled. Now there hung on his breast a brazen cross with relics of holy martyrs from Kiev, and the cross was driven deep into the flesh, that the blood from beneath it dripped like dew. Then said in his heart Stepan Paramonovitch, What is fated to be shall surely be. I will stand for the right to the uttermost. Then he gathered his strength and made him steady, crouched for a spring and a shoulder blow, aimed at the side of his enemy's head, and struck on the temple with all his weight. And the young Oprichnik faintly sighed, swaying a little, and dropped where he stood. Dead he fell on the frozen snow, as a pine tree falls, as a pine tree falls in the forest dank, when the axe goes through at the roots. And seeing this thing, Tsar Ivan Vasilievich stamped his foot on the ground in his wrath, and drew together his fateful brows, and he uttered command that the merchant straightway be seized and carried before his face. Thus began to speak the Orthodox Tsar. Answer me now on thy conscience, in truth, of thine own intent, or against thy will. Hast thou slain with death my faithful servant, e'en the best of my braves, Kiribyeyevich? O most orthodox Tsar, I will tell thee true. I slew him of my own will and intent. But why, but for what, will I tell thee not. To my God alone will I tell this thing. Give thou but command, and right willingly will I lay on the block my guilty head. Yet I pray thee, turn not thy favour away from mine innocent widow, my little babes, and my 2 young brothers, of thy grace. Well is it for thee, liege servant mine, bold fighter, thou son of a merchant's house, that thou answeredst truth and verity. Thine innocent wife and thine orphan babes will I feed from my royal treasury. To thy brothers I grant, from this day forth, powers of trading, free from assessment, throughout all the breadth of my kingdom of Russia. But for thee, go up, liege servant mine, to the place of fear, to the high place of doom, and there lay thou down thy rebellious head. I command that the axe shall be keen and fair, and the headsman his garments of honour shall wear, and the great bell shall toll for the peace of thy soul, and all the burghers of Moscow shall know that thou also art not shut out from my favour. In the square are the people gathered together, mournfully boometh and tolleth the bell, crying aloud the tidings of sorrow, in the place of fear, in the high place of doom, in a shirt of scarlet, a clasp of jewels, with the broad axe shining and gleaming fair, merrily goeth the headsman about, rubbing his hands in the pride of his heart, as he waiteth for him whose hour is come. And the bold young merchant, the fighter undaunted, now saith farewell to his brothers twain. O brothers mine and mine own dear kin, come kiss me, and let us embrace one another, ere now I leave you for evermore. Salute for my sake Alyona Dmitrovna. I charge her by you that she shall not grieve, nor speak of my fate to my little babes. Salute for my sake our father's house, and all our friends and companions dear, and pray to the saints in God's holy church for the peace of my soul, of my sinful soul. And thus Stepan Kalashnikov died, by the death of fear, by the death of shame, and under the axe his luckless head rolled down and fell from the blood-stained block. And they dug him a grave by the riverside, in the open waste where the 3 roads meet, the high roads of Tula, Ryazan, and Vladimir. And they heaped on his body an earthen mound, and they planted a cross above his head, and the winds of the wilderness moan and howl over the grave that hath never a name. And the folk pass by on their several ways. If an old man pass, he muttereth a prayer. If a young man pass, he pondereth there. If a maiden pass, she droppeth a tear. If the minstrels pass, they shall sing this song. Hey, bold singers merry and free, dulcimers all in harmony, voices of golden minstrelsy, meetly end your singing now that meetly hath begun, giving honour as is due unto every one. Now honour to the virtuous boyarin, and honour to the fair Boyarinya, and honour to all faithful Christian folk. End of The Song of the Merchant Kalashnikov, from the Russian of Mikhail Lermontov, translated by E. L. Voynich.